So you also play, you play guitar, you play other instruments, but I think mostly right now you're playing the bass. So kind of how was your like introduction to bass, and like who were some like your influences, especially like in funk and soul? There's so many, like there's such a long lineage of players like Bootsy Collins, Thundercat now, Larry Graham, people like that. Like, so who kind of like inspired you with the bass, and like how was your kind of introduction to it?
I've always been a big fan of bass and the sound and the attitude that goes with it. I've always just paid attention to the bass player when I'm watching a band. That's always been a natural thing for me. Maybe because I like the music that I come from, which is Zouk from Martinique, is like drums that's very bass heavy. Yeah. So maybe that's where it comes. But I started with guitar when I was about 16 to start writing songs. And after I moved to New York with my first band, I was playing guitar poorly. I was never really good at guitar. And we had a show and the bass player dropped at the last minute, and the guys were like, "Hey, Addie, you play guitar. Why don't you just play bass?" Literally put a bass in my hand. And the show was 2 days later. I did not know what I was doing, but I fell in love completely with the instrument. And I locked myself in a room for like a year and was a hermit and just practiced and practiced. And I became a bass player. And yes, I love the examples you mentioned in terms of inspirations, because these are people that broke the boundaries of like the stereotypes attached to bass. And I relate to them on so many levels, sonically, but also attitude wise. And bass is an interesting instrument because, and I have that in me as well, because I've played with a lot of backing people, and I love being the bass player in the back that's chilling right next to the drummer. Yeah. And just our job is to make everybody else sound good. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of this knowing, this self-knowledge that like, I know I'm the most important person on stage, but nobody knows that. And I'm okay with that. And some
drummers would argue that point,
Of course, we're all going to argue with that, but I'm a bass player. I'm going to say, and I'll say that before the singers, like who cares about singers? But yeah, and that's helped me a lot for production. Like I think in terms as a producer, this is how I approach music from kind of like the bass player perspective. Like, how can you that's why I love having duets so much, because I love having other artists like shine in my world. And that's the bass player in me. But then, watching Bootsy and Verdine White and Larry Graham in particular was like, okay, and Prince, incredible bass player, Michelle Ndegeocello, was like, oh, wow, you can be in front and flashy and that's who I am, and put on crazy outfits. And there are those bass players out there, and these people have changed the world.
Yeah, they definitely prove that bass can be, the leading man of a band. They can lead a whole band just on bass.